They said 1 drop of blood could save my life.
Then why is the machine giving 3 different results?
In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover of every magazine on Earth. Forbes called her the next Steve Jobs. Fortune called her the most powerful woman in business. The US government called her she was worth $9 billion. She was 30 years old, and every single word of it was a lie. Somewhere in a Walgreens in Arizona, a woman walked in for a routine blood test. She handed over a single drop of blood. She was told the results would change her medicine forever. What she was never told was that the machine analyzing her blood didn't work. It had never worked, and the woman who built it knew that from day one. This is the story of Elizabeth, the greatest fraud Silicon Valley ever produced, and the question that still keeps people up at night: how did she fool everyone for so long? Elizabeth Holmes was not supposed to be a criminal. She grew up in Washington, D.C., the daughter of a government official, ambitious from childhood, obsessive. She told her father at age 9 that she wanted to be a billionaire, not famous, not powerful, a billionaire specifically. She enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. She was brilliant. Her professors noticed immediately, but Holmes wasn't interested in the slow, careful path of academic research. She wanted to change the world, and she wanted to do it now. In 2003, just 19 years old, she dropped out of Stanford and used her tuition money to found a company. She called it Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. The idea was genuine liver. What if you could run hundreds of blood tests from a single drop of blood, taken from a fingertip, not a vein, and get results in hours instead of days? No needles, no labs, no waiting rooms. Healthcare democratized for everyone. It sounded like the future. Their problem was, it didn't work, but Holmes didn't let that stop her. She had something more powerful than working technology. She had a story, and she knew how to tell it. She modeled herself entirely on Steve Jobs. The black turtleneck became her uniform, worn every single day. She studied his mannerisms, his speech patterns, his ability to make people believe the impossible was inevitable. She even trained herself to speak in a deeper voice. Former colleagues later revealed her natural voice was significantly higher. The deep voice was a performance, constructed to command rooms full of men twice her age, and it worked. By 2004, she had secured her first major funding. Investors lined up, not because they had seen theology work, but because Holmes made them feel foolish for that. She spoke about Theranos the way Jobs spoke about Apple, with absolute certainty, with almost religious conviction. The board of directors she assembled was extraordinary and telling. George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State; Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor; James Mattis, U.S. Marine General. These were not technologics. These were men who understood power, not blood diagnostics. Holmes collected them like trophies. Their names gave Theranos a credibility that its science never could. By 2010, Walgreens Chemical, a partnership was struck. Theranos blood testing centers would open inside Walgreens stores across America. Millions of ordinary people would use the service. Walgreens had one internal expert who raised serious concerns about the technology. They ignored him. They were terrified of missing the next big thing. In 2013, the centers opened. Patients began receiving results. None of those results came from the Edison machine Holmes had promised. Behind the scenes, Theranos was secretly running patient samples through standard third-party machines, the same machines every other lab in America used. The revolution theoretically existed only in PowerPoint presentations and Holmes's real patients, real blood, fake results. For a while, the lie held. Holmes appeared on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. She gave TED Talks. She testified before the U.S. Senate. She was celebrated as proof that Silicon Valley could fix healthcare, that a young woman with a vision could rewrite the rules of an entire industry. But inside Theranos, something was breaking. Employees who questioned the technology were fired. Some were threatened with lawsuits. Holmes created a culture of paranoia and silence. Staff were forbidden from discussing their work, even with family members. The company operated like a cult, with Holmes at the center of it. Then in 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou received a tip from a source inside the company. Carreyrou was meticulous. He spent months building the story, speaking to former employees, scientists, and what he found was devastating. The Edison machine could only really perform a handful of tests, not the 200 Holmes had promised. Results were wildly inconsistent. Patients had been told they were HIV positive when they were not. Women had been told they were having miscarriages when they were not. People had made irreversible medical decisions based on completely fabricated data. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published the story. The world changed overnight. Holmes did not go quietly. She went on television. She called Carius reporting a lie. She called her critics jealous. She led the investigation and attack on innovation. For a brief moment, it seemed might survive it. Such was the power of the persona she had constructed. She did not survive it. The FDA inspected Theranos laboratories and found systematic failures. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services revoked Theranos' laboratory certification, effectively banning Holmes from operating a blood testing lab for Walgreens terminated the partnership. Investors began demanding. The board, the same board of generals and statesmen who had given Theranos its credibility, watched in silence as the competitors sailed around them. In 2018, the Department of Justice charged Elizabeth Holmes and her former partner and co. Sunny Balwani with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud against investors and patients. Theranos shut down completely. $9 billion gone. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes began in 2021 and gripped the world. She arrived in court pregnant. A detail her legal team was accused of using strategically to soften her image. She testified in her own defense, claiming she had genuinely believed in the technology, that she had been a victim herself of Balwani's manipulation and her own optimism. The jury did not fully believe her. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She reported to a minimum security facility in Bryan, Texas in May 2023. Sunny Balwani received an even harsher sentence, nearly 13 years. The patients who received false results received almost nothing. Some filed lawsuits. Most received small settlements. The psychological damage of being told you have cancer, or HIV, or that you have lost a pregnancy, that is not something a settlement check fixes. John Carrero's book about the scandal Bad Blood became one of the best-selling business books of the decade. It is now taught in business schools as a case study in unchecked ambition, regulatory failure, and the dangerous mythology of Silicon Valley genius. Elizabeth Holmes wanted to be the next Steve Jobs, and in one terrible way she succeeded. She proved that in the right room, with the right story, and the right amount of conviction, you can make people believe in it. The tragedy of Theranos is not just that one woman lied. It is that an entire system, investors, regulators, journalists, doctors, and governments chose to believe her, because the story was too beautiful to question, because the vision was too compelling to challenge, because no one wanted to be the person who killed the future. That is the real lesson of the capital case. Power does not always announce itself with sometimes it arrives in a black turtleneck and a drop of blood. If this story made you think you already know what to do, subscribe to the capital case.